Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was framed as a villain by the Justice League. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a cacophony of sound and fury, a familiar symphony of chaos that Izuku Midoriya had learned to navigate. The air in Muzutafu's industrial district tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. To his left, Endeavor's prominence burn painted the sky in angry swathes of orange. To his right, Bakugo's explosions were like a furious percussion, punctuated by his equally furious shouts. But Deku's focus was singular, zeroed in on the man at the epicenter of the destruction. His name, according to the emergency broadcast, was Kairos, but the heroes on the scene had dubbed him Chronosplitter. His quirk was a nightmare of quantum physics, a power that didn't just manipulate time but tore at the very fabric of reality. He didn't rewind or fast forward. He created localized paradoxes, small pockets of space where cause and effect divorced. A thrown punch would land before it was thrown. A building would collapse into dust and then, a second later, the explosion that caused it would bloom from the rubble. "You can't touch me, heroes!" Kairos shrieked, his eyes wild with a manic glee. He was a scrawny man in a lab coat, looking more like a disgruntled scientist than a city-leveling threat. A shimmering, fractured aura surrounded him, distorting the air like heat haze on asphalt. "Your linear thinking is your cage. I am already everywhere and everywhen." Deku's danger sense was a persistent, high-frequency scream in the back of his skull. It wasn't warning him of a single attack, but of the fundamental wrongness of the space around Kairos. He felt the vestiges of one for all stirring within him, a council of ghosts whispering caution and resolve. "He's unstable," the voice of Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, echoed in his mind. The quirk is tearing him apart as much as it is the city. "Be careful, ninth. Deku gritted his teeth, the green lightning of one for all, full cowling crackling around him. I know. He'd been trying to analyze Kairos's power for 10 minutes. And it was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. The villain wasn't just predicting their moves, he was making their moves irrelevant. Bakugo charged in, only to find himself abruptly 10 feet to the left, his howitzer impact detonating harmlessly against the gasometer. Shoto Todoroki's glaciers would form instantly, only to sublimate into steam as if they had been melting for hours. They were fighting a living glitch in the matrix. "It's his field!" Deku yelled into his comm, his voice strained. "We can't engage him directly inside it. We have to overwhelm it from the outside, and how the hell do we do that, nerd?" Bakugo snarled, blasting himself backward to avoid a chunk of rebar that teleported in front of his face. "A single, massive impact," Deku muttered, his mind racing, connecting the dots of his inherited quirks. He needed speed, he needed power, and he needed to break through the temporal distortion before it could react. *FA gene for kinetic energy storage. Float to get the right angle. Black whip to anchor and slingshot. And then, everything. He took a deep breath, crouching low. "I have an idea. Everyone, give me an opening. A big one." Endeavor didn't question him. The current number 1 hero unleashed a hellflame torrent, a focused beam of incandescent plasma that forced Kairos to concentrate his quirk, the shimmering field around him visibly thickening to repel the heat. At the same time, Bakugo and Todoroki coordinated, one laying down a deafening barrage of AP shots while the other erected a wall of ice to shield civilians from the crossfire. That was his window. "Float," Deku whispered, lifting off the ground. Black tendrils of energy erupted from his arms, latching onto the skeletal remains of 2 towering cranes on either side of the battlefield. He began to cycle his legs, building up kinetic energy with FA gene. The telltale blue energy swirled around his calves, a contained storm. More, he pushed. More power. "I have to shatter his reality before he shatters ours." The voices of the vestiges were a roaring chorus now, a wave of support. He felt their power, their will, flowing into him. He pulled on the black whip tendrils, stretching them taut like the strings of a colossal bow. "Now!" he screamed, releasing the tendrils. He was launched forward like a human cannonball. Smokescreen erupted from his body, not as a diversion, but to momentarily cloud Kairos's perception, buying him a precious microsecond. He broke through the shimmering veil of the villain's quirk, and for a terrifying moment, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of screaming colors and fractured images. He saw himself as a child, he saw All Might's skeletal form, he saw a future he didn't recognize, a sky full of stars he'd never seen before. Danger sense shrieked, a blade of ice in his brain. The world was coming apart. He ignored it, focusing on his target. He drew his right arm back, the muscles in his back and shoulder screaming in protest. The emerald lightning of One for All concentrated into his fist, so dense it looked like a miniature green sun. The metal bracers on his arm groaned, beginning to buckle under the strain. One for All. 100%. Kairos's eyes widened, the glee replaced by pure terror. He tried to activate his quirk, to splinter this single, impossibly fast moment. But it was too late. Deku was a constant, an absolute. As Deku's fist prepared to connect, Kairos did the only thing he could. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, he poured every last shred of his power not into defense, but into a chaotic, directionless warp. He tried to unmake the space where Deku was. The two forces met. Deku's Detroit Smash, a punch carrying the accumulated power of 9 generations of heroes, collided with a quirk that treated reality as a suggestion. The result was not an explosion. It was a silent, violent tear. A sound like grinding continents filled the air, and a void opened between Deku's fist and Kairos's chest. It was not black, but a nauseating swirl of prismatic colors, a wound in the world. The combined energies, the raw, life-affirming power of One for All and the paradoxical, unraveling energy of Chronosplitter, created a reaction no one could have predicted. The tear became a maw. It pulled at Deku with an impossible gravity. He felt his friend's distant, distorted screams. He saw Bakugo reaching for him, his face a mask of horror. But the suction was absolute. The world he knew, the sky painted by Endeavor's fire, the familiar grid of his home city, all of it warped and stretched into spaghetti-like strands of light. His last sensation was the feeling of being turned inside out, his very atoms screaming as they were dragged through a keyhole into an unknown room. Then, there was nothing but a crushing, silent fall. Pain was the first thing to register. A deep, resonant ache that pulsed from the tips of his toes to the roots of his hair. The second was the smell of cut grass and damp earth. The third was the blinding, unfamiliar quality of the sunlight on his eyelids. It felt softer, more yellow than the sun he knew. Izuku Midoriya groaned, pushing himself onto his elbows. His hero costume was in tatters. The right arm gauntlet was completely gone, and the left was cracked and sparking. His mask was missing, and he could feel a sticky wetness matting the hair on the side of his head. He blinked, his vision swimming back into focus. He was in a park. A vast, beautifully manicured park with a wide, placid river and a skyline that stole the breath from his lungs. The buildings were monoliths of glass and steel, but with a strange, elegant curve to them, an Art Deco majesty he'd only ever seen in pre-quirk history books. At the center of it all, a massive bronze globe was held aloft by a golden eagle. This was not Muzidafu. This wasn't even Japan. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. Where am I? He whispered, his voice hoarse. He tried to stand, but his legs trembled violently, the backlash from his 100% smash finally catching up to him. Green veins of light flickered over his skin before fading, his body desperately trying to contain the residual power. He scanned the faces of the people around him. They were staring, pointing, speaking in rapid-fire English. He understood them. He'd studied English obsessively, wanting to be a hero who could help everyone. But their accents were strange, their fashion was different. Most unnervingly, no one had any visible signs of a mutation-type quirk. Not a single person. It was like stepping back in time 200 years. A woman was pointing a phone at him, her eyes wide. A man was pulling his child behind him. They saw his costume, his injuries, the faint crackle of energy still dissipating from his form, and they saw a threat. He had to get out of sight. He had to figure this out. Pushing through the pain, he stumbled toward a grove of trees, his mind a frantic storm of questions. Did Kairos's quirk send me here? Is this another country? Another time, asterisk. Before he could process any of it, a new sound cut through the air, a high-pitched electronic whine, followed by a woman's cackling laughter and a series of sharp, explosive cracks. A bolt of brilliant blue lightning shot past his head, striking a nearby hot dog stand and causing it to explode in a shower of sparks and condiments. Civilians screamed and scattered. Deku's head snapped toward the source of the chaos. A woman with shockingly blue skin and hair that stood on end like a living Tesla coil was floating in the air, crackling with electrical energy. She wore a black and yellow outfit, and was firing bolts of lightning indiscriminately into the panicked crowd. "Come on, Metropolis!" she shrieked. "Get a charge out of it. Live a little." Deku didn't think. He didn't have time to consider where he was or how he got there. He saw people in danger. His body moved before his brain could issue a single command. A massive piece of decorative scaffolding on a nearby building, weakened by a stray lightning bolt, groaned ominously. A young family, a father, a mother, and a small child in a stroller, was frozen in fear directly beneath it. The metal shrieked as it began to buckle. "Move!" Deku screamed, but they were paralyzed. He ignored the fire in his muscles. Gene, release. A burst of stored energy propelled him forward. He was a green blur, crossing 50 yards in a heartbeat. He didn't have the strength for another smash, but he didn't need one. Black Whip, dark and swift, shot from his free hand, wrapping around the largest collapsing struts of the scaffolding, anchoring them to the building's main structure for a precious second. He reached the family, grabbing the father's arm and the back of the stroller in one fluid motion. "This way!" he yelled, shoving them forward, out of the drop zone. The metal supports finally gave way. The massive structure came crashing down with a deafening roar of tortured steel and shattering glass, landing exactly where the family had been moments before. Dust and debris filled the air. Deku stood between the family and the wreckage, his body shielding them, breathing heavily. The father stared at him, his mouth agape. You saved us." Before Deku could reply, the blue-skinned woman, Livewire, turned her attention to him. Well, look what we have here. A new hero on the block? Let's see how you handle 1,000,000 volts, kid." She raised her hands, electricity arcing between them. Deku pushed the family further back, bracing himself for an attack he wasn't sure he could block. And then, a shadow fell over them. A streak of red and blue descended from the sky so fast it was barely a blur. It moved with a grace that defied physics, a living symbol of hope against the blue sky. There was a gentle whoosh of displaced air, and a man was suddenly floating between Deku and Livewire. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a chiseled jaw and a single, perfect black curl falling across his forehead. But it was the symbol on his chest that made Deku's heart stop. A bold, iconic, red S inside a shield. It couldn't be. It was a comic book character. A myth from a bygone era. A fictional story from before the dawn of quirks. It was Superman. "That's enough, Leslie," Superman said, his voice calm but resonant with an undeniable authority. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to command a whole city. Livewire just sneered. "Always spoiling my fun, Supes." She unleashed a torrent of lightning, a bolt thick enough to power a city block, directly at him. Superman didn't even flinch. The lightning struck him in the chest and harmlessly dissipated against the blue of his suit, the S seeming to glow for a moment. He simply floated there, looking mildly disappointed. "I said that's enough?" With a flick of his wrist, he exhaled a focused stream of supercooled air. The mist enveloped Livewire, and in an instant, her electrical aura was short-circuited. She yelped as she was encased in a thin layer of frost, her powers neutralized, and fell limply from the air. Superman caught her gently before she hit the ground and, in a blur of motion, had her secured with a pair of high-tech-looking cuffs that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. Deku could only stare, his analytical mind completely short-circuiting. Power, output, incomprehensible. No visible energy signature. No physical strain. Flight without propulsion. Invulnerability. Thermal control. He's not real. He can't be. Superman handed the subdued Livewire over to a pair of arriving police officers before turning his attention to Deku. His expression was warm, his blue eyes filled with a genuine concern that was almost disarming. "That was some impressive work," he said, his voice kind. "You saved those people. Are you all right? You look like you've been through a war." Deku opened his mouth, but only a choked stammer came out. "SS Superman? But you're a friend," Superman finished for him, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I don't recognize your costume. Are you new to Metropolis?" I think so," Deku managed, his head spinning. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, the adrenaline finally fading and leaving only exhaustion and pain in its wake. He swayed on his feet. Superman was by his side in an instant, a steadying hand on his shoulder. The touch was surprisingly gentle for someone so powerful. "Easy there. You're hurt. Let's get you somewhere safe where you can get some help." Deku looked from the impossible man in front of him to the impossible skyline behind him, at the word Metropolis on the side of a bus. The pieces, however insane, were clicking into place. He wasn't in another country. He wasn't in another time. He was in another world entirely. The Hall of Justice, Deku breathed, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning awe. Can we go there?" He knew it from the same comic books. It was their headquarters. Superman looked surprised, then his smile returned, wider this time. "Of course. It seems you know a little about us. Come on." He put a gentle arm around Deku's shoulders, and before Deku could protest or even fully comprehend what was happening, they lifted off the ground. The sensation of flight, so different from Nana Shimura's float, was breathtaking. It was effortless, silent, and impossibly fast. The city of Metropolis sprawled beneath them, a shining testament to an era of heroes he thought was only fiction. As they approached a magnificent white building on the waterfront, shaped like a grand, futuristic station, Deku's mind, battered and bruised as it was, couldn't help but ignite with a million questions. This was the home of the Justice League. Of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the greatest heroes of a world he'd read about as a child. Maybe they could help him. Maybe they could get him home. For the first time since he was ripped from his world, a fragile tendril of hope began to bloom in Izuku Midoriya's chest. He was lost, but he had been found by the greatest hero of them all. He was safe. Far above the earth, in the silent, sterile confines of the watchtower, the atmosphere was anything but safe. The meeting was held in the shadows, a colloquial name for one of Batman's private, unlisted briefing rooms. There were no windows looking out at the majestic swirl of the planet below. There were only dark gray walls, a single circular table, and holographic displays showing telemetry and energy readings that made no sense. 3 figures were present. Batman sat at the table, a monolithic silhouette of darkness and brooding intensity. His gauntlet hands were steepled in front of his cowl, the white lenses of his mask fixed on the data. Across from him stood Wonder Woman, Princess Diana of Themyscira. Her arms were crossed over her iconic chest plate, her expression a mixture of warrior's concern and regal poise. She looked from Batman to the third figure, the one who was the cause for this clandestine meeting. He stood, but did not seem to rest on the floor. He was a pillar of gold and blue, his face obscured by the gleaming, featureless visage of the helmet of Nabu. Dr. Fate. The disturbance was instantaneous and catastrophic to the local laws of reality. Batman's gravelly voice cut through the silence. A dimensional membrane was breached over Japan, a reality concurrent to our own. One entity was pulled through. The boy Superman just brought to the hall, Diana stated. He says the boy is a hero. That he acted selflessly to save lives the moment he arrived. What he is, Batman countered, his tone leaving no room for argument, is the epicenter of an anomaly that is already causing microscopic fissures in our space-time. The energy he emits is unlike anything on record. It is biological, yet it seems to violate the first law of thermodynamics. It creates energy from nothing. Dr. Fate had remained silent until now. When he spoke, his voice was a chilling chorus, the ancient, dispassionate voice of Nabu the Wise layered over that of his human host. The Lords of Order are alarmed, the voice echoed, seeming to come from the very air in the room. His arrival was not a simple crossing of thresholds. It was a tear, a key forced into a lock it was not made for. The tumblers of creation are groaning. Diana's brow furrowed. What did you see, Nabu? When he arrived, you recoiled. Dr. Fate turned his golden helmet toward her. The empty eye slits seemed to hold the weight of galaxies. I saw a vision. A potential future, born from the moment his essence touched our world. A hush fell over the room. Prophecies from Nabu were not to be taken lightly. They were pronouncements of cosmic destiny. Show us, Batman commanded. The air in the center of the room shimmered. An image resolved itself, hazy and ethereal. It showed a world of fire and ruin. The sky was a sickening blood red, choked with black smoke. The recognizable skylines of Metropolis, Gotham, and Central City were shattered husks. And in the center of the devastation, a figure stood. It was a silhouette, but the form was unmistakable. Spiky hair, a muscular build, and crackling around him, an aura of destructive, chaotic green energy that seemed to be actively devouring the reality around it. The emerald spark arrives on borrowed time, Dr. Fate's voice intoned, a grim narration to the apocalyptic scene. His heart is a hero's, but his power is a key. Unchecked, it will not build, but unmake. I see his silhouette against the crimson sky, standing on the bones of a broken world. The image faded, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Diana looked horrified. That cannot be. The boy Superman described. He is not a destroyer. Intent is irrelevant, Batman stated, his voice a cold razor. The vision is clear. His power, this one for all as he calls it, is the catalyst. It's a multiversal paradox, a power that grows with each wielder. It has no upper limit. In our reality, which operates on a different set of physical laws, that exponential growth is interpreted by the universe as a cancer. A corruption that must be excised. The unmaking is our reality trying to purge his energy, and tearing itself apart in the process. Then we must help him control it, Diana insisted. Or find a way to contain it. We must find a way to send him back. Sending him back requires replicating the energy signature that brought him here, Batman said, pulling up a complex waveform on the holoscreen. We would have to generate an equal, opposing force. To do that safely, we would need to drain his power first. An attempt to force a portal open while he is at full strength could shatter the dimensional wall entirely, bringing about the very cataclysm fate has foreseen. He let that sink in. The terrible, elegant logic of their trap. He is a hero, Batman continued, his voice dropping lower. He will fight to protect people. He will not surrender his power willingly, especially not if he thinks it's the only way he can get home. What are you proposing, Bruce? Diana asked, a note of dread in her voice. Batman finally looked up, and the white lenses of his cowl seemed to bore into her. His plan was already formed, every contingency calculated, every moral compromise weighed and accepted. The prophecy says his power is the key. And he is the epicenter. Therefore, we need to neutralize him. We need to drain that energy until he is no longer a threat to this reality's stability. We need him to expend his power, over and over, until he is a shell. He will not fight us, Diana argued. He sees us as idols. Then we will give him a reason to fight, Batman said, the words hanging in the air like coffin nails. We can't ask for his power. We can't reason with him. The stakes are too high to risk him saying no. We need to unite the world's heroes against him. We need to turn him into a monster. Diana stared at him, aghast. You want to frame him? To brand a heroic child as a villain? To hunt him down? I want to save our world, Batman retorted, his voice devoid of all emotion. The survival of billions outweighs the reputation and well-being of one lost boy. The greater good is not a pleasant concept, Diana, but it is the foundation upon which we built the League. He stood up, his cape seeming to drink the light from the room. We will set a stage. We will orchestrate a tragedy. We will give the world a villain so powerful, so terrifying, that every hero on the planet will be needed to stop him. We will hunt him, we will fight him, and with every blow he throws, his power will drain. When he is weak enough, fate can safely intervene and we can send what's left of him home. Our reality will be saved. And what of the boy's spirit? What of the truth? Diana asked, her voice a pained whisper. This is a deception that will poison everything we stand for. The truth is that our world will die if we do nothing, Batman stated. My plan offers a chance. A dirty, ugly, necessary chance. He looked at Dr. Fate. Nabu agrees. The golden helmet nodded slowly. The path of order is not always the path of righteousness. The calculus of existence demands this sacrifice. The boy's fate is tragic, but the fate of a universe is absolute. Batman turned back to Diana. He hadn't included Clark in this meeting for a reason. Superman's unwavering, sometimes naive, belief in the inherent goodness of people would be a liability. He would never agree to such a monstrous deception. He would try to find another way, a better way, and they would lose precious time they didn't have. This had to be done quickly, decisively, and with absolute conviction. The decision is made, Batman said, his tone final. We will welcome him as a friend, and then we will break him. We will turn him into a pariah to save everyone. It's the only way. Wonder Woman looked from the cold, calculating strategist in the bat suit to the impassive, cosmic entity in the golden helmet. She saw the apocalyptic vision in her mind's eye again. A world of bones. With a heavy heart and a soul that felt suddenly tarnished, she gave a slow, reluctant nod. Down on Earth, in the grand, sunlit foyer of the Hall of Justice, Izuku Midoriya was looking at a statue of Superman, his eyes shining with the pure, unadulterated adoration of a lifelong fan who had just met his god. He was unaware of the cold, cosmic mathematics being done at his expense. He didn't know that the heroes he revered were, at that very moment, planning his ruin. He felt safe. He felt hopeful. And he had no idea he was already standing on the edge of a nightmare. The 24 hours that followed his arrival were a dizzying, surreal dream. Izuku Midoriya, a boy who still kept meticulously detailed notebooks on heroes he admired from afar, was now living in their world. The Hall of Justice wasn't just a building. It was a living museum. A temple dedicated to the very concept of heroism he had devoted his life to. Superman, whose real name he learned was Clark Kent, acted as his personal guide. He was every bit the paragon of virtue the old comics had described, kind, patient, and radiating an aura of unwavering sincerity that put Izuku's frayed nerves at ease. He was given a thorough but gentle medical examination by a robotic physician, which hummed and whirred as it scanned his strange biology. Batman was present for this, a silent, brooding statue in the corner of the med bay. He didn't speak a word to Izuku, but his analytical gaze was a palpable force, dissecting him piece by piece. Izuku, ever the analyst himself, recognized the look. It was the same intense focus he applied to a new quirk, but amplified 1,000-fold. It was unnerving, but he chalked it up to the legendary paranoia of the Dark Knight. He was simply being cautious with an unknown variable. The scans confirmed what Izuku already knew. His body was a furnace for a power they couldn't quantify. The energy readings for One for All went off their charts. It's fascinating, Clark had said, looking at a holographic display of Izuku's energy signature, a vibrant, swirling nebula of green light. It's like you have a star inside you, but one that burns with life force instead of fusion. Batman had merely grunted, his eyes narrowing on the screen. We need to monitor it. Constantly. They gave him new clothes, simple civilian attire that felt strange and baggy after being so used to his hero costume. They also presented him with a replacement for his tattered suit. It was a sleek, advanced-looking uniform, crafted from a dark, durable material similar to Superman's, but in his signature forest green. It lacked his usual bulky gauntlets and iron-soled shoes, replaced with a more streamlined design that incorporated microscopic energy regulators into the fabric. A temporary suit, Wonder Woman explained, her voice a warm, melodic contralto. She had a regal presence that was both intimidating and comforting. It will help our systems monitor your energy output, and ensure you remain stable in our world's atmosphere. Izuku had bowed so low his forehead almost touched the floor, stammering his profuse thanks. A custom-made suit from the Justice League. It was a gift beyond his wildest dreams. He failed to notice the fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of profound sadness in Diana's eyes as he accepted it. He mistook it for solemnity. He didn't realize the suit was not a gift, but a cage, not a uniform, but a tracking beacon. The decision was made, relayed to him by Superman, to hold a press conference. The world saw your arrival, Clark explained as they walked through a grand hall lined with tributes to fallen heroes. They saw you save that family. But they're also scared. You're a complete unknown with incredible power. We need to introduce you, to show them you're a friend, to let them know that the Justice League is handling the situation and is committed to helping you find your way home. It made perfect sense. All Might had taught him that a hero's duty wasn't just to fight villains, but to reassure the public, to be a symbol of peace that calmed their fears. The idea of speaking in front of a crowd, especially one from an entirely different dimension, sent a jolt of pure terror through him. His hands grew clammy and he started muttering uncontrollably. Public speaking is definitely not one of my strong suits. My English is good, but my accent might be strange. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they ask about quirks? It might cause a panic if they think anyone could suddenly develop powers. Maybe I should just stand there and smile. But my smile is kind of weird when I'm nervous. It looks more like a grimace. Hey, Superman said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. The sheer weight of that simple gesture anchored him. Just be yourself, Izuku. Tell your story. Let them see the hero I saw in the park yesterday. That's all you need to do. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. He could do this. For All Might. For the people of this world who were scared. He would be the hero they needed him to be. The sun was bright over Metropolis. A podium had been set up on the grand marble steps of the Hall of Justice, overlooking the water. A sea of reporters, journalists, and cameramen were assembled, a veritable army armed with microphones and flashing cameras. The noise was a dull roar of shouted questions and clicking shutters. Izuku stood between Superman and Wonder Woman, feeling small and woefully out of place. He wore his new, sleek green suit. It felt alien on his skin. Green Lantern, the human one, Hal Jordan, stood off to the side, arms crossed with an air of cocky confidence. His emerald ring glowed with a soft, steady light. Batman was nowhere to be seen, which was somehow both a relief and a source of anxiety. Superman stepped up to the microphone, and an immediate hush fell over the crowd. His presence alone commanded absolute respect. Good morning, he began, his voice effortlessly carrying over the assembled press. Yesterday, our city, and indeed our world, witnessed the arrival of an individual from another dimension. He gestured to Izuku. His name is Izuku Midoriya. He arrived here by accident, the result of a conflict in his home world. In his first moments here, despite being injured and disoriented, his immediate instinct was to save innocent lives. He is, by every measure we have, a hero. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Izuku felt a blush creep up his neck. The Justice League is currently working with our brightest minds to understand the dimensional rift that brought him here, Superman continued. Our primary goal is to return him safely to his home. Until then, he is a guest of Earth and an ally of the Justice League. Izuku has agreed to answer a few of your questions. Superman gave him a reassuring nod and stepped back. It was his turn. Izuku walked to the podium on legs that felt like overcooked noodles. He gripped the sides, his knuckles white. He saw a woman in the front row with a press pass that read Lois Lane, Daily Planet, and a young man next to her with a camera, Jimmy Olsen. They were real. All of it was real. Hello, he stammered into the microphone. My hero name is Deku. It means you can do it. I promise I mean you no harm. I just want to get home to my friends. A reporter from Gotham Gazette shouted the first question. Deku, what can you tell us about your powers? We saw you use multiple abilities. They're part of my quirk, he began, trying to find the simplest explanation. It's called One for All. It's a power that's passed down from one person to the next. He never got to finish the sentence. It started with a low hum, a sound that vibrated in his teeth. Danger sense flared, not as a sharp spike, but as a sickening, twisting lurch in his gut. Something was fundamentally wrong. Then came the explosion. It wasn't near them. It was a block away, a massive, fiery blossom of orange and black that erupted from the top floors of a Wayne Enterprises financial building. The sound wave hit them a second later, a deafening crack boom that shattered windows and sent the crowd screaming and ducking for cover. Superman and Wonder Woman immediately shot into the air, their expressions grim. Jordan, stay with the boy. Superman commanded as he became a red and blue streak heading for the disaster. But the disaster wasn't just over there. It was here. As the heroes flew off, Izuku's head whipped around, trying to find the source of the threat. And then he saw it. And his blood ran cold. From the steps of the Hall of Justice, a figure was launching itself toward the damaged building. A figure in a sleek green suit, wreathed in familiar emerald lightning, tendrils of pure black energy. His own black whip erupted from the figure's back, lashing out and tearing huge chunks of concrete from the facade of a neighboring building, sending them plummeting toward the street below. What? Izuku breathed, his mind unable to process the sight. That's me. It was a perfect, horrifying replica. A hologram, he realized, but one so advanced, so detailed, it was indistinguishable from reality. It moved with his exact posture, mimicked his fighting style. He could see its mouth forming a silent, maniacal snarl. He's attacking! Someone screamed. He was a Trojan horse. Another yelled. Green Lantern stepped in front of him, his body tense, his ring flaring to life. Kid, what the hell are you doing? That's not me! Izuku yelled, his voice cracking with panic. I'm right here. It's an illusion. To prove his point, a second, even more violent event unfolded. From a hidden location, a device hummed to life, projecting a focused beam of modulated energy, the exact signature of One for All, copied from his medical scans, directly at the epicenter of the holographic chaos. To any scanner, to any hero who could read energy, it would seem as if the destructive power was originating from him. Then came the masterstroke of the entire, perfect frame. A C-list hero, one of the global guardians named Crimson Fox, swung in on a grappling line, landing between the holographic Deku and the panicking civilians. She was a French hero, known for her enhanced senses and agility. Arit! Stop this madness! She cried. The holographic Deku didn't hesitate. It lunged forward in a blur of motion, its fist, crackling with fake green lightning, slamming into her chest. The hologram passed through her, of course, but at the exact same moment, a small, precisely placed concussive charge on her suit detonated. It was enough to throw her backward with violent force, enough to make a sickening thud as she slammed into a news van, leaving a massive dent. She collapsed to the ground, motionless. The world saw an unprovoked, brutal assault. They saw a beloved minor hero struck down. The live news feeds, now being subtly manipulated by a master strategist from a dark cave miles away, cut all footage of the real Izuku Midoriya standing in stunned silence on the steps. They zoomed in on the holographic doppelganger standing over its victim. They zoomed in on Crimson Fox's still form. They zoomed in on the chaos, the fire, the falling debris. The world's opinion turned on a dime. The narrative was set in stone within 10 seconds. The alien visitor was a lie. This was an invasion. An attack. A betrayal of the highest order. No, Izuku whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He took a step forward, wanting to help, to explain, to scream that this was all a lie. He was stopped by a wall of brilliant green light. A construct, a solid barrier, had formed in front of him. He turned to see Hal Jordan, his face a mask of cold fury, his ring pointed directly at Izuku's chest. I don't know what your game is, kid, but it's over, Green Lantern said, his voice dangerously low. You're going down. Hard. It's a trick. Izuku pleaded, his voice desperate. You have to believe me. I didn't do any of this. Suddenly, a golden lasso snaked through the air, wrapping around his arms and pinning them to his sides. It tightened with immense force, and he felt a warm, potent energy emanating from it. He turned and saw Wonder Woman landing softly behind him, her expression one of grim, heartbreaking resolve. Superman was nowhere in sight, likely still dealing with the expertly staged diversion at the Wayne building. This was a coordinated attack. Against him. Surrender, son of Midoriya, she said, her voice heavy with a sorrow he couldn't comprehend. Do not force our hand. The betrayal was a physical blow, more stunning than any punch. Superman's kindness. Wonder Woman's gentle words. The suit. The press conference. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted stage for his own damnation. Why? He choked out, the single word a testament to his shattered idealism. Why are you doing this? You are a danger, she replied, her voice unwavering, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the lasso. That is all you need to know. They weren't listening. They weren't going to listen. The realization crashed over him with the force of a tidal wave. They had already judged him. This was his execution. His mind flashed back to every underdog fight, every impossible situation he'd ever faced. Muscular. Overhaul. Shigaraki. He had never run. He had always stood his ground. But this was different. This wasn't a battle against villains. This was a battle against gods who had already decided he was a monster. To fight was to play their game. To surrender was to accept their lie. There was only one other option. The vestiges of One for All, silent until now, roared to life within him. They felt his despair, his terror, his righteous fury. They would not let the ninth fall to such deceit. I'm sorry, he whispered to them, to himself, to the heroes he had once idolized. And then he moved. He focused his will. Smoke screen. A thick, billowing cloud of black smoke erupted from his entire body. It was instantaneous and dense, engulfing the top of the steps in total, blinding darkness. The sudden sensory deprivation made Hal Jordan flinch, his construct flickering for a split second. Wonder Woman held fast to the lasso, but she couldn't see him. It was the only opening he would get. One for All, full cowling, 30%, green lightning flared within the smoke. He didn't try to break the lasso. He knew it was indestructible. Instead, he used its anchor point. He kicked off the ground, using the lasso's tension like a tetherball rope, swinging his entire body around Wonder Woman in a wild, unpredictable arc. He slammed his iron-soled boots into Green Lantern's side. The Green Lantern was caught by surprise, not by the force of the blow, but by the sheer audacity of the move. He grunted, his concentration breaking for a crucial half-second. His wall construct dissolved. The path was open. Float. Izuku commanded internally. He felt Nana Shimura's power activate, neutralizing his weight. At the same time, he channeled the raw energy of OFA into the lasso of truth itself. He couldn't break it, but the feedback, a jolt of alien bioenergy traveling up the divine artifact, was enough to make even the Amazon princess gasp and her grip loosen infinitesimally. In that microsecond of slack, he wrenched his arms free. He was airborne now, hovering in the dissipating smoke. He's getting away! He heard Hal Jordan roar. A giant green hand, the size of a bus, materialized from the lantern's ring and swiped at him. Deku twisted in midair, channeling kinetic energy with FA gene into a single burst. He shot downwards under the swinging hand, the wind from its passage tearing at him. He hit the street and ran. His movements were a blur, a green streak zipping through the panicked, screaming crowds. He didn't want to scare them, but he had no choice. Get back here, you little monster! Green Lantern yelled from above. Beams of green energy lanced down, exploding chunks of pavement around him. Hal was being careful not to hit civilians, but that care was the only thing keeping Izuku alive. Wonder Woman was a golden blur in his peripheral vision, flying parallel to him, easily keeping pace. She wasn't attacking, merely hurting him, cutting off his escape routes toward the open sky or the bridge. They were boxing him in. He needed cover. He needed to break their line of sight. He saw his salvation ahead, a dark, gaping maw in the sidewalk. A Metropolis subway entrance. Underground, the voice of the fourth user, Haiku Shinomori, whispered in his mind. Asterisk shadows are our friend, ninth. They cannot follow where the sun does not reach. Asterisk. He poured more power into his legs, pushing his output to a risky 45%. The world became a smeared watercolor painting. The new suit held up remarkably well, preventing his bones from shattering under the strain. Another lie, another piece of the trap, had become his only advantage. A green cage construct slammed down in front of him, but he was too fast. He slid under it, the soles of his boots screeching on the asphalt, and launched himself into a forward roll. He came up just feet from the subway entrance. Wonder Woman swooped down, her silver bracelets ready, her face set like stone. She was beautiful and terrifying, an avenging angel of a cause he didn't understand. It's over! She commanded. Izuku met her gaze for a split second. He saw the regret warring with her resolve. It didn't matter. She had made her choice. Now he had to make his. He didn't try to fight her. He feinted left, then spun right, diving headfirst down the stairs into the darkness of the subway station. He heard her land with a heavy thud on the pavement behind him. He didn't look back. He hit the bottom of the stairs and kept running, plunging into the grimy, echoing tunnels. The sounds of the city above, the sirens, the screams, the roar of a jet engine he suspected was Wonder Woman in pursuit, began to fade, replaced by the drip of water and the distant rumble of a train. He ran for what felt like miles, his lungs burning, his body screaming in protest. He took random turns, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels on pure instinct, guided by the frantic thrum of danger sense. Finally, utterly spent, he collapsed in a damp, abandoned service tunnel, the darkness a welcome shroud. He was alone. He was in a world that was not his own. His body ached, but it was nothing compared to the colossal, shattering agony in his chest. The heroes he had read about, the symbols of hope he had looked up to his entire life, had welcomed him with open arms only to orchestrate his fall in the most public and cruel way imaginable. He wasn't a hero here. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't even a person. He was a monster. A villain. A perfect frame for a crime he didn't commit. Tears of confusion, rage, and profound, bottomless despair finally came, hot and silent in the suffocating dark of the metropolis underground. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who just wanted to be a hero, was now the most wanted fugitive on a planet he didn't understand, hunted by the very gods he once revered. The darkness of the metropolis underground was a physical entity. It was a cold, damp shroud that smelled of stagnant water, ozone, and the faint, coppery tang of old decay. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a tomb and a sanctuary all at once. He huddled in the service tunnel, the sleek green suit, a Judas gift, providing a thin barrier against the chilling concrete. His breath plumed in faint, ghostly clouds in the sliver of light from a distant maintenance bulb. He was running on nothing but fumes and a core of shivering, incandescent rage. The despair was a vast, cold ocean, but the anger was a single, hot point within it. They hadn't just defeated him. They hadn't just outsmarted him. They had taken his most precious possession, not one for all, but his identity as a hero, and twisted it into a horrifying effigy to be reviled by the world. His mind, a relentless engine of analysis even in its grief, replayed the events on an agonizing loop. The perfectly timed explosion. The flawless hologram. The energy signature emitter. The planted hero taking a fall. The media manipulation. It was too precise, too clean. It reeked of contingency, of planning. This wasn't a rash decision made in a moment of panic. This was a calculated assassination of his character. And only one mind he knew of, even from the pages of fiction, was that meticulous, that ruthless. Batman. The name was a bitter taste in his mouth. The Dark Knight, the master strategist, the hero who operated from the shadows with a moral code as black and white as his sigil. Izuku had spent hours of his childhood poring over analyses of his tactics, his gadgets, his psychology. To be on the receiving end of that formidable intellect was like being a mouse in a maze designed by a malevolent god. There was no escape, only the path the maze maker had laid for you, and the path laid for him led directly to ruin. A discarded copy of the Daily Planet lay in a puddle nearby, its headlines stark and brutal even in the dim light. Metropolis Mauler, alien hero unleashes reign of terror. Below it, a picture of the hologram, his own face contorted in a demonic snarl, was frozen mid-punch as it connected with the hero, Crimson Fox. The article, penned by Lois Lane, was a masterclass in controlled panic, detailing the unprovoked attack, the sheer destructive power, and quoting a grim-faced General Swanwick who had already declared Deku a global threat. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was the Metropolis Mauler. He was a monster to be hunted. He learned the truth of that statement an hour later. Danger sense, which had been a low, persistent hum of anxiety, suddenly spiked into a high-frequency shriek. It wasn't the premonition of a punch or a falling object. It was the chilling certainty of impending discovery. The air itself seemed to vibrate, a static charge building in the tunnel. He scrambled deeper into the darkness just as a blur of red and yellow lightning flooded the main tunnel he had just vacated. The flash. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He pressed himself flat against the grimy wall, behind a rusted fuse box, holding his breath. He knew Flash's capabilities from the comics. He could evacuate a city in seconds. He could search every corner of Metropolis before Izuku could take another breath. Hiding was a fool's errand. The crimson-clad hero, Barry Allen, materialized at the far end of the tunnel. He wasn't running, but standing still, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond the range of normal hearing. Even his stillness seemed impossibly fast. The air around him crackled with the energy of the Speed Force. "I know you're down here," Flash's voice echoed, calm and reasonable, which was somehow more terrifying than a threat. "Look, I just want to talk. We can figure this out. What happened up there? It wasn't you, was it?" For a heart-stopping moment, hope flared in Izuku's chest. He knows. He doubts the story, but the hope was immediately extinguished by a cold dose of tactical reality. It could be a trick, a way to lure him out. After the choreographed betrayal on the steps of the hall, he couldn't trust a single word from any of them. He remained silent, motionless. He willed his heart to slow, his breathing to cease. He channeled a sliver of OFA into his body, not to move, but to hold every muscle in perfect, rigid stillness. Flash sighed, a sound that seemed to echo for an eternity. "All right. Have it your way." He began to move. To Izuku, it looked like he was teleporting. One instant he was at the end of the tunnel, the next he was 20 feet closer, then another 20. He was methodically searching every alcove, every junction, his movements too fast for the human eye to properly track. He was a living search grid, and he was closing in. Danger sense was now a continuous, mind-splitting scream. The vibration in the air was overwhelming. He would be found in the next 5 seconds. Think, Izuku, think. What would Eraserhead do? Misdirection. Environment. The distant rumble of an approaching train gave him his answer. It was his only chance. A desperate, insane gamble. Just as Flash turned his head toward Izuku's hiding spot, his eyes about to lock on, Izuku acted. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He slammed his hand on the rusted, ancient fuse box next to him. Smoke screen. It wasn't a cloud. In the confined space, it was an explosive, instantaneous blanket of absolute blackness. At the same time, with his other hand, he ripped the fuse box from the wall. Sparks flew, and the ancient wiring, exposed to the damp air, short-circuited spectacularly. The few remaining lights in the entire subway section flickered and died, plunging everything into a primordial darkness that even Flash's supersenses would struggle with. The approaching train's horn blared, its headlights cutting a swathe through the smoke-filled blackness. It was his cover. Gene, release. He shot out of his hiding spot, not away from Flash, but directly past him, a silent, low-profile blur within the greater chaos of smoke and noise. The speedster, disoriented by the sudden darkness and electrical discharge, spun around, but Izuku was already gone, a phantom in the maelstrom. He reached the platform just as the train screeched to a halt, its doors hissing open. A few weary late-night commuters were on board, their faces pale and drawn. He vaulted over the turnstiles and squeezed himself between two cars, clinging to the grimy metal exterior as the doors hissed shut. The train lurched into motion, pulling him out of the station and into the endless dark of the tunnels. He risked a glance back. For a split second, he saw the silhouette of the Flash standing on the empty platform, a lone figure in a sea of smoke, the red of his suit a dying ember in the gloom. The hunt was over, for now, but it was too close. Far too close. Metropolis was a cage. It was Superman's city, bright, clean, and open. Every street was monitored, every rooftop visible from the sky. It was a city of glass and sunlight, a place with nowhere to hide. He had to go somewhere else. Somewhere dark. Somewhere broken. Somewhere a ghost could disappear among other ghosts. His mind, a repository of pre-quirk pop culture, supplied the name with grim certainty. Gotham. The journey was a blur of cold steel and rattling bones. He found his way to the rail yards on the industrial outskirts of Metropolis, a sprawling metallic graveyard under a sky polluted by factory smoke. He located a cargo train bound east, its manifest listing a final stop in the Gotham City Port Authority. He slipped into an open boxcar filled with crates of what smelled like industrial solvent, and settled into a dark corner, pulling a dusty tarp over himself. As the train began to move, it carried him away from the gleaming, optimistic architecture of tomorrow and toward the Gothic, brooding heart of a perpetual midnight. He watched the metropolis skyline, a collection of crystalline spires that touched the heavens, shrink in the distance. It looked like a city of hope. A hope that had been a lie. He must have drifted into an exhausted, fitful sleep, because when he awoke, the feeling of the world outside had changed. The air filtering through the gaps in the boxcar was different. It was heavier, thick with the smell of old rain, damp brick, and a pervasive, low-level chemical tang. The sounds were different, too, the distant, lonely wail of a foghorn, the shriek of unseen trains, the chorus of 1,000 different despairs. He peered out. The skyline that greeted him was a jagged wound in the bruised twilight sky. Buildings weren't elegant spires. They were Gothic monstrosities, hunched shoulders of stone and gargoyles that seemed to scowl down at the streets below. A perpetual gloom seemed to cling to the city, a smog of industry and misery that the sun could never quite burn away. This was Gotham. It was exactly as the stories had described it. It was perfect. He slipped off the train as it slowed in the sprawling, derelict yards of Gotham's industrial district, the Tricorner Yards. No one saw him. No one cared. He was just another shadow in a city made of them. He pulled up the hood of the simple gray sweatshirt he'd found, keeping his head down as he melted into the urban decay. His first destination was the area he knew would offer the most anonymity, a place so broken and forgotten that he would be just one more lost soul. The Narrows. It was a maze of crumbling tenements, overflowing dumpsters, and narrow, winding streets where the sunlight was a distant memory. The graffiti here wasn't art. It was a desperate scream, territorial markings of gangs whose names sounded like nightmares. The False Facers, the Red Hood Gang, the Ghost Dragons. The people he saw had a look in their eyes he'd never seen before, not even in Japan's roughest districts. It was a permanent, bone-deep weariness, a mix of fear and defiance that came from living on a razor's edge every single day. He found shelter in a condemned apartment building, a skeletal ruin with gaping holes where windows used to be. His room was on the 5th floor, offering a commanding view of the street below, but its back wall had collapsed, opening it to the biting Gotham wind. It was there he began his new life. The days bled into a routine of grim survival. He learned to move like a wraith, using float to drift between rooftops, his footsteps silent. His analytical mind, once dedicated to heroics, was now repurposed for stealth and evasion. He studied the city's rhythms from his perch. He learned the patrol routes of the GCPD cruisers, which rarely ventured deep into his territory. He learned the territories of the local gangs, mapping out their turf wars and supply lines in his head. And he learned about the bats. He saw them only as fleeting shadows against the moon. A dark, terrifying shape that was unmistakably Batman. A smaller, more agile figure that he deduced was one of the Robins, a flash of red hair and a swirling cape that he guessed was Batgirl. They were legends, just like Superman, but here they felt real, tangible. They were a part of the city's ecosystem, the apex predators in a jungle of concrete and crime. He made it his primary directive to stay out of their way, using danger sense to feel the subtle shift in the air that preceded their arrival, melting into the deeper shadows long before they passed. This Gotham was a revelation. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the hero society he knew. Back home, heroism was a profession. It was bright, public, and regulated. Heroes had agencies, merchandise, popularity rankings. They operated in the daylight, their battles spectacular displays of power. Here, heroism was a grim, nocturnal war. It was a thankless, bloody crusade fought alley by alley, soul by soul. The villains weren't always theatrical megalomaniacs. More often, they were just desperate people, their lives twisted by poverty, addiction, and the city's all-consuming corruption. He saw a man steal a loaf of bread and get beaten half to death by a shopkeeper. He saw children, no older than 10, working as lookouts for drug dealers. He saw the systemic failure, the deep, cancerous rot that necessitated a figure as extreme as the Batman. His own heroic instincts were a constant, aching torment. Every cry for help, every scream in the night, was a hook in his soul, pulling at him. But he couldn't act. He couldn't reveal himself. To use his power, even to save one life, was to risk discovery by the League, by the bats, by the entire world that was hunting him. He was a ghost. Ghosts don't intervene. They only watch. For weeks, he held to that rule. He observed. He survived. A part of him, the bright, hopeful boy who had inherited One for All, began to wither and die in the cold Gotham darkness. Until one night, he couldn't bear to watch anymore. It was a damp, cold Tuesday. A persistent drizzle had been falling all day, making the streets slick and reflecting the jaundiced glow of the few working streetlights. From his perch on a gargoyle 5 stories up, Izuku was watching the street, his senses on high alert. He was tracking a low-level gang war that had been brewing, but his attention was caught by a different, more intimate kind of violence. A young woman was walking home, her pace hurried. She wore nurse's scrubs under a thin raincoat, a clear sign she was coming off a long shift at the free clinic on the edge of the Narrows. She was an easy target. 2 men detached themselves from a shadowed alleyway, blocking her path. They were big, grimy, and moved with the twitchy, unpredictable energy of cheap Venom knockoffs. One of them held a rusty pipe. "Evening, doll," the first one slurred, his smile revealing a row of broken, stained teeth. "Working late? You must be tired. Why don't you let us walk you home?" "Just gotta pay the toll first." He gestured at her purse with the pipe. The woman froze, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched her bag to her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's all I have." "That's the point," the second one chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He began to circle around her, cutting off her retreat. Izuku's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles cracking. His entire being screamed at him to act. No. Stay hidden. Don't get involved. It's not your fight. It's not your world. But then he saw the pin on her uniform. It was a small, cartoonish bluebird. A symbol of hope in this hopeless place. And he remembered why he'd taken All Might's power in the first place. Not for fame, not for glory, but because his body moved on its own when he saw someone in trouble. He couldn't be Deku, the symbol of peace. But maybe, just for a moment, he could be a nameless, faceless protector. A ghost who did more than just watch. He didn't launch himself into a heroic charge. He simply dropped. Using float, he descended silently into the alley behind the thugs, his feet making no sound as they touched the wet pavement. He was enveloped by the shadows, becoming one with the grime and the dark. He activated his quirks with surgical precision, a whisper of power instead of a roar. A tiny, localized puff of smokescreen, no bigger than a basketball, bloomed directly in front of the first thug's face. It was just enough to make him cough and flinch, his eyes watering. In that split second of disorientation, a single, impossibly fast tendril of black whip shot out. It wasn't a wrecking ball. It was a surgeon's scalpel. It wrapped around the pipe in the man's hand and yanked. The pipe flew from his grasp, clattering harmlessly down the alley. The second thug turned at the sound, his eyes wide with confusion. "What the?" He never finished his question. Another tendril of black whip, as thin as a wire, lashed out and wrapped around his ankles. A sharp tug, and his feet were swept from under him. He yelped as he went down, his head connecting with the pavement with a sickening thwack that knocked him unconscious. The first thug, his vision clearing, stared in disbelief at his empty hands and his downed partner. He looked up, his drug-addled brain trying to process the impossible. He saw nothing but shadows. Izuku, still hidden, used Fa Gene. He didn't throw a punch. He merely focused a tiny burst of kinetic energy into a loose pebble on the ground near his foot. He flicked it with his toe. The pebble shot through the air like a bullet, striking the thug squarely on the temple. It wasn't enough to kill, not even enough to break the skin, but the focused kinetic impact was more than enough to short-circuit his nervous system. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed in a heap. The entire encounter had taken less than 3 seconds. It was silent, efficient, and utterly baffling to any observer. The nurse stared, her hand over her mouth, her terrified breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. She looked from the 2 unconscious forms to the shadows of the alley, searching for her savior. She saw nothing. From the darkness, Izuku watched her. He saw her slowly lower her hand, her expression of terror melting into one of stunned, tearful gratitude. She whispered a quiet thank you to the empty alley before clutching her bag and running the rest of the way home, not looking back. Izuku remained in the shadows until she was gone. A faint, almost forgotten warmth spread through his chest. It was the feeling of having helped someone. It was the core of who he was. He used Black Whip to bind the two thugs securely to a lamppost, leaving them for the GCPD or the bats to find. Then, he turned to melt back into the city's labyrinth. He was a ghost once more, but he hadn't been entirely unseen. High above, perched on the edge of a rooftop across the street, a different kind of ghost had been watching. Nightwing, Dick Grayson, had been on his way to intercept a weapons deal 2 blocks over when the flicker of movement in the alley had caught his eye. He'd seen the mugging begin and was about to swing down, his eskrima sticks already in his hands, when the situation resolved itself with a speed and strangeness that made him pause. He had the whole thing on the high-resolution recording function of his mask's lenses. He replayed it, slowing it down frame by frame, a puff of smoke from nowhere. A black, whip-like tendril disarming one man. Another tendril tripping the second. A final, invisible impact dropping the first. It was brutally efficient, non-lethal, and utterly bizarre. It wasn't Batman's style. Bruce was more direct, more fear-based. It wasn't Tim's or Damien's. And it certainly wasn't any known rogue. Then, his mind connected the dots, pulling up the bolo alert that had been screaming across all Justice League channels for weeks. Asterisk subject Deku. Trans-dimensional entity. Extremely powerful and unstable. Energy projection, super strength, and black, energy-based tendrils. Considered armed, dangerous, and hostile after the unprovoked attack in Metropolis. Asterisk. Dick frowned, replaying the footage one more time. The official story, the one Bruce had delivered to the League with grim finality, painted this Deku as an engine of uncontrollable rage. A monster who had lashed out and nearly killed a fellow hero in broad daylight. But what he had just witnessed wasn't rage. It wasn't chaos. It was the opposite. It was precise, controlled, and fundamentally protective. The target wasn't the victim, it was the threat. The force used was the bare minimum required. It was a rescue, executed with the kind of stealth and efficiency that he, a student of the world's greatest detective, could appreciate. The two images refused to reconcile in his mind. The rampaging monster from the news feed, and the silent, shadowy guardian of this dark alley. One of them was a lie, and Dick Grayson had a very strong suspicion it wasn't what he had just seen with his own 2 eyes. He watched as a small, hooded figure detached itself from the alley's deepest shadows. The figure moved with a fluid grace but also a heavy sadness, a slump to its shoulders that spoke of a crushing weight. It scaled the tenement wall with an unnatural ease and disappeared over the rooftops. Nightwing smiled, a wry, curious expression. This wasn't some cosmic threat to be neutralized. This was a scared kid, hiding in the one city on Earth he thought he could get lost in. A scared kid who, despite everything, couldn't stop himself from being a hero. The official story was too perfect, as he'd once told Bruce about a different case. And when things were too perfect, it meant someone had planned them that way. The ghost of Gotham had a name. And Dick Grayson was going to find him. Not to fight him. But to the city of Bloodhaven was Gotham's uglier, grimier little brother. While Gotham brooded with a gothic majesty, Bloodhaven festered. It was a city of perpetual decay, of rust and ruin, where the stench of the industrial wharf was a constant, cloying perfume. It was a city that chewed up hope and spat out cynicism. For Dick Grayson, it was home. And its sprawling, interconnected rooftops were his personal gymnasium. For 3 nights he hunted. He swapped his Bloodhaven patrols for covert incursions into Gotham's Narrows, a territory Batman usually left to the less experienced members of his flock. Dick, however, knew these streets. He cut his teeth in alleys just like these, first as Robin, now as Nightwing. He moved with a silent, acrobatic grace that was uniquely his, a fluid dance of flips, leaps, and swings that was a stark contrast to Batman's heavy, fear-based movements. He wasn't hunting a monster. He was tracking a ghost. His target, the boy they called Deku, was preternaturally skilled at evasion. More than skilled, It was as if he could feel Dick's presence before he even arrived. Several times, Nightwing had closed in, using thermal imaging to spot a lone heat signature on a distant rooftop, only for it to vanish moments before he could get a clear visual. The kid was using the city's architecture, its steam vents, its labyrinthine fire escapes, with an instinct that should have taken years to develop. It was frustrating, but it was also deeply impressive. It only solidified Dick's belief that this was no mindless brute. This was a trained, intelligent, and terrified individual. On the fourth night, he changed his tactics. He wasn't the hunter. He was the bait. He found a scenario, a depressingly common one in the Narrows. A shakedown. A group of low-level thugs from the False Face Society, their faces covered in cheap, mismatched masks, were cornering a street vendor, an old man selling roasted nuts from a rickety cart. It was a pathetic display of power, bullying the weak for a handful of crumpled bills. It was the kind of petty cruelty that the ghost seemed unable to ignore. Nightwing perched on a water tower 2 blocks away, his amplified listening gear focused on the scene. He didn't intervene. He just waited. He made himself a visible, but distant, part of the nocturnal skyline, a clear signal to anyone with enhanced senses that a bat was on patrol. He watched the thug shove the old man, sending his cart toppling over, nuts scattering across the grimy pavement. The old man cried out, a sound of pure despair. Dick's hands tightened on his eskrima sticks. His every instinct screamed at him to swoop in and end this. Patience, Grayson. Patience. And then he felt it. A subtle shift in the air. The barest whisper of movement in the alleyway to the left of the confrontation. His mask's lenses, switched to a high-contrast motion capture mode, picked up a flicker of green. A brief, almost subliminal shimmer of energy. The lead thug, a burly man in a cracked porcelain doll mask, raised his fist to strike the old man. Before his knuckles could connect, his wrist was suddenly, violently yanked backward. A thin, impossibly fast black tendril had shot from the alley, wrapped around his arm, and pulled. The thug yelled in surprise, stumbling off balance. Before his companions could react, the ghost moved. It was not an attack. It was a symphony of precise, non-lethal takedowns. A green-suited figure exploded from the alley, not with a battle cry, but in utter silence. He moved low and fast, a blur of motion. One thug was swept off his feet by a leg sweep executed with impossible speed. Another was disarmed as a flick of a finger sent a discarded bottle cap into his hand with the force of a rubber bullet, making him drop his knife with a yelp of pain. The final thug turned to face the threat, only to have a cloud of thick, black smoke erupt in his face. Blinded and choking, he was neutralized with a single, sharp chop to the back of the neck. It was over in 5 seconds. 4 men down and out, without a single killing blow. The figure Deku immediately turned to the old man, helping him to his feet, his movements gentle and reassuring. He began to gather the scattered nuts, his head bowed, his face obscured by his hood. This was Dick's chance. He fired his grappling line and swung down, landing silently on the edge of a rooftop directly overlooking the scene. He didn't want to startle him, to trigger another chase across the city. He just wanted to be seen. Deku froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. Slowly, ever so slowly, he raised his head, and for the first time, Nightwing saw his face clearly under the flickering streetlight. He was a kid. He couldn't have been more than 17. His face was smudged with dirt, his green eyes wide with a frantic, cornered animal terror. Freckles dotted his cheeks, a stark, boyish contrast to the haunted look in his eyes. Deku's first instinct was to bolt. He took a half-step back, his body already coiling, the telltale green lightning beginning to crackle around his fists. "Easy," Dick said, his voice calm and even, projecting it just enough for the boy to hear. He held his hands up in a universal gesture of peace, his eskrima stick still holstered on his back. "I'm not here to fight you." The boy didn't relax. If anything, he grew more tense. His eyes darted around, looking for escape routes, assessing threats. He was analyzing, just like Bruce would. "Stay back," he warned, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, rough from disuse. His English was perfect, but carried an accent Dick couldn't quite place. "I'm not going to," Dick replied, his voice softening. You and I need to talk. About what happened in Metropolis. About why you're hiding in the worst part of my city. He saw a flicker of confusion in the kid's eyes. My city. The bolo had him in Metropolis. The news reports were all Metropolis. The name Nightwing clearly didn't register. That was good. It meant he wasn't just another member of the Justice League in the boy's mind. He was an unknown quantity. There's nothing to talk about, Deku said, his defensive posture unwavering. You saw the news. I'm a monster. The last word was filled with a self-loathing so profound it was a physical blow. No, Dick said, and he dropped from the rooftop, landing in a soft crouch on the pavement about 20 feet away from him. Close enough to talk, far enough not to be an immediate threat. I saw the news, and then I saw you. Right here. I've been watching you for 4 nights. The monster on TV blows up buildings. The kid I've been watching risks his own neck to save street vendors from low-life thugs. The stories don't match. Deku stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. Disbelief warred with years of ingrained caution. He had been so careful. How had this person seen him? Dick reached slowly into one of his belt pouches. The boy flinched, his lightning flaring brighter. Dick paused, then continued his slow, deliberate movement. He wasn't pulling out a weapon, he was pulling out a protein bar. A Nightingale, one of his personal custom-made snacks, packed with enough carbs and protein to get through a long patrol. He tossed it underhand. It skidded across the pavement, and stopped at Deku's feet. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in weeks, Dick said gently. Go on. It's not poisoned. Izuku stared at the bar. It was such a small, mundane, human gesture. Thugs and monsters didn't offer food. Heroes did. But the heroes of this world had already shown him their true faces. This had to be a trick. Another layer of the trap. And yet, he was starving. Truly, deeply hungry. The gnawing emptiness in his stomach was a constant companion. He hadn't eaten anything but scraps he could scavenge from dumpsters for what felt like an eternity. Slowly, cautiously, he bent down and picked up the bar. He inspected it, turning it over in his hands. It looked normal. He looked up at the man in the black and blue suit. His mask had white, expressive lenses, currently conveying a look of patient understanding. He wasn't coiled like a predator. He was relaxed open. Who are you? Izuku asked, his voice barely audible. The name's Nightwing, he replied with a slight, reassuring smile in his voice. And I have a simple question for you, kid. What really happened in Metropolis? The question was a key turning a lock in Izuku's soul. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a judgment. It was a genuine inquiry. It was the one thing he had been screaming into the void for weeks, the one thing he was desperate for someone, anyone, to ask. The dam broke. The tension in his shoulders sagged. The green lightning sputtered and died. The cornered animal in his eyes was replaced by a wave of profound, soul-crushing exhaustion. He tore open the protein bar with trembling fingers and took a bite. The taste, chocolate, nuts, and something vaguely like coffee, was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. He chewed and swallowed before speaking, his voice thick with unshed tears. They framed me, he said, the words tumbling out, raw and unfiltered. All of them. Superman. Wonder Woman. They welcomed me, they promised to help me, and they set me up. They made it look like I attacked the city. They made everyone hate me. They tried to capture me. I don't know why. I never did anything wrong. He told his story. The arrival from his world. The rescue in the park. The warm welcome. The promise of a press conference. And then the cold, calculated betrayal. He described the hologram, the faked energy signature, the brutal efficiency of the trap. As he spoke, Nightwing listened, his head tilted, his posture never changing. He didn't interrupt. He just absorbed it all. When Izuku finished, the silence that fell was heavy. He stood there, vulnerable, having laid his entire, insane truth at the feet of a stranger. He fully expected to be laughed at, to be called a liar. Instead, Nightwing nodded slowly. I believe you, he said, the 3 words landing with the force of a physical blow. Izuku staggered back a step, his eyes wide. You do? I do, Dick affirmed. Because, like I said, the story was too perfect. It was clean, efficient, and had maximum emotional and political impact. It left no room for doubt. And in my line of work, when a crime is that flawless, it's almost never what it seems. It means it was an inside job, planned by someone who knows exactly how to manipulate perceptions. He paused, a grim note entering his voice. And there's only one person I know who fits that description. He didn't need to say the name. Izuka knew. Batman, why? Izuka asked, the question that had been haunting his every waking moment. Why would they do this? That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Dick said, pushing himself to his feet. And I think it's time we found some answers. But we can't do it out here. You're the most wanted person on the planet. You need a safe place to lie low. A real one. Not a condemned building. He gestured with his head. Come with me. I have a place in Bloodhaven. It's not much, but it's off the grid. No one will find you there, I promise. For the first time in weeks, Izuka Midoriya was faced with a choice that wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. He could retreat back into the shadows, alone, and continue his ghostly existence until he was inevitably found and neutralized. Or he could take a leap of faith. He could trust this stranger, this Nightwing, who moved with the grace of a hero and spoke with a voice that didn't hold a trace of deception. He looked at the half-eaten protein bar in his hand. A simple act of kindness in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. He made his choice. Okay, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I'll go with you. Meanwhile, in the sterile, silent heart of the Justice League watchtower, another flicker of doubt was being kindled. Barry Allen, the Flash, was not a detective in the same way Bruce was. He wasn't a master of deduction or psychological profiling. Barry was a scientist. A forensic scientist. And to him, the universe was not a collection of mysteries, but a series of quantifiable data points. And the data from the Metropolis attack was not adding up. He stood in his lab aboard the orbital station, a holographic reconstruction of the event shimmering in the air before him. He had run the sensor logs over 100 times. On the surface, everything was perfect. The energy signature from the point of destruction perfectly matched the scans they'd taken of the boy, Izuku. The timeline of the holographic projection was flawless, but forensics was about the small things. The trace evidence. The details no one else thought to look for, and Barry had found something. It was a ghost in the machine. A background radiation signature, so faint it was almost statistical noise. He had isolated it, amplified it, and run it against every known energy source in the Justice League's database. He'd found nothing. It was alien. Exotic. But it wasn't random. It was strongest around the area where the energy emitter had been, the one that faked Deku's power output. It was also present, in even smaller traces, in the atmospheric data from the moment Dr. Fate had first appeared in the briefing room to deliver his prophecy. It was a loose thread. And Barry couldn't stop himself from pulling it. He cross-referenced the energy with a restricted database, one even Batman didn't know he had access to, compiled from his own ventures into the Speed Force and the multiverse. And he got a hit, a terrifying, impossible hit. The energy signature contained trace elements of decaying nth metal, the material that made up Dr. Fate's helmet. But it was also laced with something else, something much older, chrono radiation consistent with temporal magic. The kind of energy Zatanna used, but on a cosmic, reality-bending scale. The kind of power that didn't just show the future, but could potentially shape it. The official story was that Dr. Fate had a passive vision. But this suggested the use of active, powerful magic. More than that, it suggested the prophecy itself might have been tainted, influenced, or worse, created. His mind raced. Why would fate do that? Nabu, the Lord of Order within the helmet, was ancient, alien, and often ruthless, but he was not deceptive. Unless he was being manipulated himself. Or unless he believed the threat was so great that a lie was the only weapon that would work. Barry felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He had supported the plan. Reluctantly, yes, but he had supported it. Bruce's logic had been cold but sound, based on the evidence presented. The vision of a destroyed world was a compelling argument. But what if the evidence itself was a fabrication? He needed a second opinion. Someone impartial. Someone who could see things others missed, who could sense the truth beneath the layers of deception. He phased through the wall of his lab, a silent red wraith, and moved through the watchtower. He didn't head for the command center or the briefing rooms. He went to the quiet meditation chambers. He found him there, floating in the center of the room in a lotus position, his red eyes closed. John Johns, the Martian manhunter. John, Barry said softly, not wanting to startle him out of his trance. The Martian's eyes opened, glowing with a soft crimson light. He didn't turn his head. I am here, Barry. What troubles your mind? It races faster than usual. His voice was not spoken, but a calm, resonant thought that bloomed directly in Barry's consciousness. I need your help, Barry said, walking into the room. And I need you to be discreet. I think there's something wrong with the official story about the kid. He laid it all out. The anomalous energy readings. The traces of nth metal and temporal magic. His growing suspicion that the prophecy that had served as the foundation for their entire, morally questionable plan might have been more than just a simple vision. As he spoke, he watched John's face. The Martian's expression was famously stoic, but Barry could see the subtle shift. A deepening of the lines on his brow. A tightening around his mouth. John wasn't just listening with his ears. He was tasting the emotional and psychic resonance of Barry's words, sensing the truth within them. When Barry finished, John remained silent for a long moment, his red eyes seeming to look through Barry, into the very heart of the watchtower itself. For several weeks, John finally projected, his mental voice heavy with a new gravity, I have sensed a dissonance. A conflict in the collective consciousness of the League. It is most potent when Batman and Wonder Woman are present. It feels like a carefully shielded truth. A core of profound guilt, walled off by a conviction of necessity. He floated down to the floor, his feet touching the ground silently. Your data gives this feeling a shape, Barry Allen. It suggests the deception runs deeper than even the boy, Izuku, knows. So what do we do? Barry asked, his voice urgent. We can't go to Bruce. If he's behind this, he'll just shut us down. We can't go to Clark. He'd tear the League apart trying to get to the truth immediately. That might be even more dangerous. No, John agreed. Direct confrontation would be unwise. It would fracture the League when we must remain united. If there is a larger threat, one that would necessitate such a grand deception, we cannot afford to be divided. His crimson eyes met Barry's. We will conduct our own investigation. Quietly, you will continue to analyze the physical evidence. And I will probe the periphery of their minds. I will not force entry. That is a violation I will not commit against my friends. But I will listen. I will listen to the thoughts they do not realize they are having, the truths that lie sleeping in the quietest corners of their conscience. A silent pact was formed in the meditation chamber, light years above the earth. An alliance born of a flicker of doubt. While Nightwing was building a bridge of trust in the grimy streets of Gotham, Flash and Martian Manhunter were beginning to pull at the loose threads of a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of the Justice League. The perfect frame was beginning to show its cracks. And through those cracks, a dangerous and terrifying truth was threatening to spill out. The world was not in danger from a lost boy from another dimension. It was in danger from the very secret his arrival had been manufactured to conceal. The safe house in Bloodhaven was an anonymous brownstone apartment, tucked away on a street of identical, weary-looking buildings. From the outside, it was indistinguishable from the urban decay that surrounded it. Inside, it was a pocket of sterile efficiency and high technology, a stark contrast to the grime of the city. It was one of Dick Grayson's many bolt holes, scrubbed of any connection to his real identity, and shielded by enough counter-surveillance tech to make a government agency weep. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the first place in weeks where he could breathe without the constant, suffocating weight of being hunted. The first order of business had been simple, human necessities. A long, hot shower that washed away layers of Gotham's grime. A meal that wasn't scavenged from a dumpster. A stack of pizzas ordered under a fake name to a drop box 2 blocks away and retrieved by Nightwing. Izuku ate with a ravenous, near-frantic hunger that spoke of weeks of deprivation. Dick watched him, not with pity, but with a growing sense of anger at what had been done to this kid. He saw the way Izuku's eyes darted towards the windows at every siren, the way he still flinched at sudden noises. The League hadn't just framed him, they had systematically broken him. So, Dick said, leaning back in a chair after Izuku had finally finished his fourth slice of pepperoni. He had removed his domino mask, revealing the friendly, disarming face of Dick Grayson. He'd made the calculated decision that showing the kid the man behind the mask was the fastest way to build a foundation of real trust. Let's start at the beginning. I've got the official story, the one the League is selling. Now I want the truth. Every detail. From the moment you arrived. Izuku, his stomach full and a spark of warmth returning to his soul, nodded. He began to talk. And as he did, the hero analyst within him, the part that had been dormant for so long, reawakened. He wasn't just recounting events, he was deconstructing them. His mind, now fueled by calories and a flicker of hope, became a whirlwind of tactical analysis. The explosion was a diversion, Izuku explained, his hands moving as he mapped out the scene in the air. It was big, chaotic, but specifically targeted the top floors of an empty building. Maximum visual impact, minimal casualties. It was designed to draw away the heavy hitters. Superman and Wonder Woman responded instantly. That was the primary objective, isolate me. Dick nodded, impressed. Classic misdirection. Bruce's signature. Then the hologram, Izuku continued, his voice gaining momentum. It wasn't just a projection, it was a perfect mimic. It replicated my fighting style, my posture, even the specific way one for all's lightning arcs around my body. To have that level of detail, they must have been studying me from the moment I arrived. The medical scan, it wasn't just for my health, was it? They were data mining me. They were recording my biometrics, my energy signature, everything. The new suit they gave you, Dick added, the pieces clicking into place. Wonder Woman said it was to monitor your stability. It was probably feeding them a live telemetry stream, giving the hologram a perfect template for real-time mimicry. Izuku's eyes widened. Of course. And the energy emitter, that was the nail in the coffin. It faked my power signature at the scene, making the illusion empirically verifiable. Any hero arriving with energy scanners would get a positive lock. It wasn't just a visual trick, it was a forensic one. He stood up and began to pace the small apartment, his mind on fire. The whole thing was a performance. Every element was a piece of a carefully constructed narrative. The heroic welcome, the press conference to create a public spectacle, the sympathetic backstory. It was all designed to make the betrayal more shocking, more absolute. They didn't just want to make me a villain, they wanted to make me the ultimate traitor. A monster disguised as a savior. Dick listened, a grim expression on his face. The kid was brilliant. His analytical skills were on par with Tim's, maybe even Bruce's in some ways. He saw not just the what, but the why behind every tactical choice. They built you up just to tear you down, he said softly. It guarantees no one would question the story, no one would ever believe your side. Exactly, Izuku said, stopping his pacing. He looked at Dick, his green eyes intense. But a performance that perfect, it has to have flaws. A stray reflection on the hologram. A slight delay in the audio. A discrepancy in the energy readings. The data has to be there. We just have to find it. Dick leaned forward, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. You're right. And I know just who to call to find it. But we're going to need more than just my setup here. We're going to need a supercomputer. And the best damn hacker on the planet. He stood and walked over to a secure terminal in the corner of the room. He ran a hand through his black hair. She's not going to like this. She trusts Bruce implicitly. But she trusts me too, and more importantly, she trusts the data. He initiated a heavily encrypted, multi-layered video call. After a series of cascading security protocols, a face appeared on the screen. It was a young woman with vibrant red hair and a sharp, intelligent face. She sat in a high-tech command chair, surrounded by a dizzying array of monitors and holographic displays. The iconic, stylized bat symbol of the Bat family was visible on one of the screens behind her. This was Barbara Gordon. This was Oracle. Dick? Her voice came through, crisp and clear. This is an unscheduled call on a deep-level encrypted line. Either the world is ending, or you're in over your head. Which is it tonight? Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, already analyzing him. A little of both, Babs, Dick said, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a serious gravity. I need your help. It's about the Metropolis incident. The kid, Deku. Barbara's expression immediately hardened. A professional, icy calm settled over her features. The official league report is comprehensive, Dick. He's an Omega-level threat. Unstable and extremely dangerous. His current whereabouts are unknown, but he's considered a top priority for containment. The official report is a lie, Dick said, his voice firm. I've found him. He's here with me now. He stepped aside, revealing Izuku, who stood awkwardly in the background. Barbara's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, her gaze sweeping over Izuku, her mind processing 1,000 data points in a single second. She saw not the monster from the news reports, but a tired, scared-looking teenager in a borrowed sweatshirt. Dick, what have you done? She whispered, her voice a mix of shock and concern. You're harboring a fugitive. I'm harboring a victim, he countered. Babs, I saw him. I watched him for days. He's not a killer. He's a hero. A scared kid who can't stop himself from helping people, even when his own life is on the line. The attack in Metropolis was a framed job. A perfect, meticulously planned framed job. And it has Bruce's fingerprints all over it. He could see the conflict in her eyes. Her loyalty to Bruce was a fundamental part of who she was. But her loyalty to the truth, to the raw, unbiased data, was even stronger. It was the core of her identity as Oracle. Prove it, she said, her voice a cold challenge. That's why I'm calling you, Dick replied. He gestured to Izuku. His name is Izuku Midoriya. And he's about to walk you through exactly how they did it. We have the theory. We need you to find the proof. For the next hour, with Dick providing context and Izuku supplying the detailed, first-hand analysis, they laid out the entire conspiracy for Barbara. She listened in silence, her fingers flying across her keyboard, pulling up news footage, satellite imagery, and Justice League sensor logs. She was a whirlwind of digital activity, cross-referencing timelines, analyzing pixel densities, and running diagnostic sweeps on energy signatures. At first, her expression was skeptical, her questions sharp and probing, testing their theory for weaknesses. But as Izuku detailed the specifics of the hologram's behavior, and the precise nature of his own powers, her skepticism began to wane, replaced by a dawning horror. The shadow angles are wrong, she muttered, zooming in on a piece of footage showing the holographic Deku. The light from the explosion should cast a shadow behind him, but it's faint, almost non-existent, like the hologram's light source is overriding the ambient light. She pulled up another screen. The audio is too clean. In a chaotic scene like that, there should be more distortion, more echo from the surrounding buildings, but the sounds of the attack are isolated, as if they were added from a separate audio track. Then, she found the smoking gun. Following Izuku's theory about the suit, she hacked into the archived telemetry logs from the prototype he wore. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, she breathed, her eyes wide. There's a 10-second data lag. The suit's real-time biometric feed is broadcasting 10 seconds behind the events happening on the ground. It was a buffer. They were using his live data to puppet the hologram, but they needed a delay to react to his movements and make the mimicry look authentic. But the final piece of proof came from the energy readings. She isolated the exotic radiation signature that Barry Allen had also found, a ghost in the machine. Her systems, however, were more powerful, linked to the Batcomputer's vast and esoteric databases. She ran a deep-level comparison. That's not possible, she whispered. The program found a match, but not in any known energy database. It found it in a deep archive file from one of Batman's contingency plans, a file labeled Project Chimera. Babs? What is it? Dick asked, seeing the look on her face. It's a Wayne Enterprises RD project, she said, her voice grim. Top secret. A prototype holographic system combined with a programmable energy emitter, designed for advanced military deception and large-scale crowd control. It can perfectly replicate any energy signature it's been programmed with, and project a flawless, interactive solid light hologram to match. Her eyes met theirs through the screen, the full, horrifying weight of the conspiracy finally crashing down on her. The project was personally overseen by Bruce, and its primary testing facility is at the Wayne Enterprises financial building. The same one that was attacked. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a fact. Batman had used his own technology, his own resources, to orchestrate the entire event. He had framed a child, lied to the world, and manipulated the entire Justice League. Oracle is online, Barbara said, her voice now cold and hard as diamond, the friendly Babs gone completely. The objective is clear. We need the original, unaltered data from the Chimera Project servers. If we can get that, we have irrefutable proof of the frame-up. Proof we can leak to the right people. Proof that can turn the tide. She looked at Dick, then at Izuku. But that facility is a fortress. And you can bet Bruce has his own people guarding it. This just went from an investigation to an infiltration. Are you two ready for that? Dick looked at Izuku, whose face was a mixture of vindication and terror. The kid nodded, a fierce, determined light in his eyes. We're ready, Dick said. Send us everything you've got. The game had changed. They weren't hiding anymore. They were fighting back. The argument took place in the heart of the Fortress of Solitude, a place of crystalline beauty and profound silence, chosen specifically because no one could eavesdrop. Here, under the light of a bottled Kryptonian sun, Superman finally confronted Batman. Clark had been tormented for weeks. The image of the terrified boy he had brought to the Hall of Justice refused to reconcile with the raging monster from the news reports. He had trusted Bruce's judgment, trusted fate's prophecy, but the actions they had taken felt like a violation of his very soul. It was a cold, pragmatic solution that had no room for hope, no room for the inherent goodness he believed existed in everyone. It felt wrong, on a fundamental, molecular level. He had called Bruce here, demanding a face-to-face, away from the prying ears and eyes of the watchtower. Batman appeared from the shadows of the fortress, his dark form a stark slash against the brilliant, glowing crystals. You wanted to talk, Clark. Batman's voice was a low growl, devoid of warmth. I want the truth, Bruce, Superman said, his arms crossed over the iconic S on his chest. He wasn't floating. He stood on the crystal floor, man to man. About the boy. About Metropolis. I can't shake the feeling that we did something terrible. That we crossed a line we can never uncross. We did what was necessary, Batman stated, his tone flat and unyielding. We neutralized a multiversal threat. The plan is working. His energy output has been fluctuating wildly as he runs and hides. He's expending power. He's getting weaker. He's a child, Bruce. Clark's voice boomed, the crystal walls around them vibrating with his frustration. A child we lured into a trap. We destroyed his name, his hope. We turned him into a pariah. That's not justice. That's a crucifixion. It's triage, Batman retorted, taking a step forward, his cape swirling around him. Sometimes, to save the patient, you have to amputate the limb. His very existence here is the disease. Everything we have done is to prevent the infection from spreading. And you're so sure of the diagnosis? Clark pressed, his blue eyes boring into the white lenses of Batman's cowl. You're basing this entire, monstrous act on one vision from an entity we barely understand? A vision that conveniently justified the most extreme, ruthless course of action? That doesn't sound like caution, Bruce. It sounds like confirmation bias. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and heavy. For the first time, a flicker of emotion, a flash of defensive anger, broke through Batman's stoic facade. Do you think I wanted this? He snarled, his voice a rasp of controlled fury. Do you think I enjoyed orchestrating that fiasco? Turning a boy with a hero's heart into a global fugitive. This isn't a game, Clark. This is about the survival of our reality. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. I'm going to tell you something I haven't told the others. Not even Diana. Fate's full prophecy. The part one withheld because I knew you wouldn't be able to bear it. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The vision didn't just show a world in ruins. It was more specific. He said the green hero will be the nexus for the end. His power is a key that will unlock destruction. And when the key turns, the first to fall will be a son of Krypton, his hope a dying star against the coming void. Clark staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. The words hit him with the force of a kryptonite bullet. His hope a dying star. The prophecy foretells your death, Clark, Batman said, his voice now devoid of anger, filled only with a grim, chilling certainty. The collapse of our universe begins with you, with the fall of its greatest symbol of hope. Now do you understand? I am not doing this to be cruel. I am doing this to save you. To save everyone. I will sacrifice one boy's reputation, his spirit, even his life if I have to prevent that future from ever coming to pass. I will not stand by and watch you die. The raw, painful honesty of the confession silenced Clark. He saw now that this wasn't just about cold calculation for Bruce. It was personal. It was born from his deepest, most defining trauma, the fear of losing his family. The fear of being unable to protect the people he cared about. His ruthless, monstrous plan was, in its own twisted way, an act of love. An act of protection for his closest friend. The fracture between them wasn't just about tactics or morality anymore. It was about two opposing philosophies, born from two different lives. Clark, the man who was raised in the sun, believed in hope, in finding a better way, even against impossible odds. Bruce, the man who was born in the shadows of a dark alley, believed in preparing for the worst, in making the hard, ugly choices to prevent tragedy from ever striking again. And what if you're wrong, Bruce? Clark asked, his voice a pained whisper. What if the prophecy isn't a warning, but a roadmap? What if our actions, your plan, what if that's the very thing that causes it to come true? Batman turned away, his back to Superman, the black silhouette of his cape a wall between them. That, he said, his voice a gravelly echo in the vast crystal chamber, is a risk I'm willing to take. The conversation was over. The line had been drawn. And as Batman disappeared back into the shadows from whence he came, Superman was left alone in his fortress of solitude, more isolated than he had ever been, with the chilling words of a prophecy ringing in his ears and a terrible, growing doubt solidifying in his heart. He was trapped between his faith in his friend, and the terrifying possibility that in his attempt to save him, Bruce had damned them all.